is vested with them. So he refers to that as an example. So there's something that's very much a signature asset in our community, yet at the same time, it was because of the authority that council would have. So when we talk about taxation, so for instance, a charter can allow us to work independently with the province through authorities if we want to change the tax rate system, like the cap. So we're not having this province-wide system. You can roll something out in the community, the city, the economic region most affected. You can talk about tax concessions, tax incentives, depending on the type of sectors. Right now, we don't have that authority. And it's an issue in terms of the New Dawn Center for Social Innovation, because we are under a tax structure that is very difficult for us. We don't have that authority to make those changes. So what are the things that drive economic opportunities? And just to Councillor Coombs' comment that the Premier's recognized the challenge of the legislative framework of the Halifax Charter, and that's where regulatory authority can be built in, where Cabinet can make decisions on requests and ministers do the oversight. So when you make a decision to give XYZ company a tax concession because they're going to come and set up in the CBRM, council make that decision, but still the minister has to go and say, yes, that is a responsible decision. It's not just a blank check for decision making, but it allows you to have a free and open ability to wheel and deal. And that we don't have. So I think those measures that come into play, and then the next tier that will come is in the area where Halifax by design is planning and community establishment and stabilization issues that can be there. Because the point about downtowns, I live in Sydney Mines. It's now a bedroom community of Sydney Mines, but it still needs to have good parks, good community assets. The businesses that are there are now services for the most part, you know, save some carryover traditional businesses. So those mechanisms for planning are the next phase that we would get into discussion on.
Don, as part of the collective, the One Nova Scotia collective, have you had sort of occasion to look at structural changes that have the potential to have impact? The Ivany Commission sort of called on a reimagining of governance. Have you looked at case studies, maybe in other places?
That's one area that we have not investigated yet, so no.
Okay. Is it an area you would be open to investigate, sort of in concert with some of this work?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's very important. Are there any other comments about the Charter or sort of components we would like to see? There seems to be a broad consensus for the Charter and the broad themes that need to be covered in the Charter, and more autonomy for the CBRM to sort of work with its tax and economic levers. And so that's sort of very encouraging that
Tom, just one of the other elements with a charter, which was part of when we talk about development, port development, was the ability to do the same as a Crown authority to issue a 99-year lease. That ability to transfer and to put, because if someone's going to lease that, there really is, it has to be the same as freehold tenure to be able to negotiate and keep it for public trust and public benefit. So that's an element that would be part of a charter, and that ability to make that decision. And part of that was looking at saying, well, why would municipalities have that authority? And the Me Too factor, and of which we say, if someone's prepared to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a 99-year lease in any community, I'd say bring on as many as you can. But the point is, we need to have that as a tool to get a major economic driver and an opportunity in the community.
Okay, thank you. So now I'd like to invite another soundbite around the table. In response to this question, by what benchmarks should we be measuring success in the CBRM in 5 years? Please suggest any numbers if possible. It could be borrowed from One Nova Scotia, extrapolated from One Nova Scotia, or perhaps particular to CBRM. So some benchmarks that would signal that we're doing well or reasonably well under the circumstances in 5 years. Could we do a tour of the table on it? Maybe, and we'll come to you, Don, on this as well after, but we'll start with Darren.
Some stabilization of the loss of population, I think, would be a big one for us to see. Our employment rate in better standings. For me, our poverty rate is just ridiculous that 5 out of 6 municipalities in the province are over 30% poverty. You know, and 5 of them are in Cape Breton. So I'll leave those 3 and I'll go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think first of all, we have to recognize in order for us to look at 5 years, we have to look at today and tomorrow and a week later and a month later. And I think that we're in the right direction. But to project what we like, I think that that migration has to stop. It's not acceptable. We have to, immigration it's an economic driver. We found that out. When I look at the new startups of eating establishments and other businesses, I think we have to recognize that this is a positive. It's not 30, 40 jobs, 50 jobs, but it's 4 and 5, and that's what you have to look at. And I think that the charter would be the biggest, would be one of our biggest things to accomplish, because then we can move forward with our thoughts.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I think that they're all good points that have been made. I think child poverty is definitely a big one, especially with the federal government of trying to reduce and raise those 300,000 families out of poverty. And with Cape Breton having one of the highest child poverty rates in the country, I think it's definitely something we want to focus on. And hopefully with the next census, we'll be able to see in 5 years' time of how that's progressed with this new Canada Child Benefit, because we're putting almost $60 million a year into the hands of those that need it most in our riding alone. So when you take in Cape Breton Council, you'll be over $100 million a year going into that. So I think that it's all interrelated in terms of the charters and trying to keep people here and increase immigration numbers. It's all based on the economy, and we have to improve the economy. And one of the tools that we can use to do that is through this municipal charter. So I think it's a very important part.
Okay, thank you. George?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with the first couple of gentlemen here to my left. Again, the unemployment rate has been so high, so I would think in 5 years our unemployment rate would be maybe the best in the province, or the lowest in the province, or highest, or wherever you want to put it. But also, I mentioned starting off this evening, I would think the number of smaller employers, smaller businesses, and so on. We hope we'll have the major ones here, but hopefully a larger number of larger businesses. So I would think that would be my key in 5 years to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Kendra?
Yeah, I have to agree. The stabilization of population, which includes the retention of our youth, would be something that is a benchmark, even if it's at a 1 to 2%. You asked for numbers. I'll aim low to exceed expectations. From when poverty is one, and it's always been one, and I take eradication of poverty. I'd say no poverty at all in the CBRM. I'll take that as a good number of success. But going to realistic, I'll limit that down to 1 in 200 children living in poverty. I think that's a benchmark. But I think as long as there's poverty, we're failing, as far as I'm concerned. The other thing I would say is a benchmark of success is what was mentioned earlier, and that is the growth of the outer areas. And that is to see the outer areas outside of Sydney see some growth of economic development and of growth of community, where you see vibrant communities again. You've seen a decline in just the look and the feel of communities. If we can get the look and the feel of communities become more positive, I would consider that a great benchmark of success.
Okay, thank you. Eldon?
Thanks very much, Tom. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach in this that I didn't expect to take, but here goes. For me, it's about unemployment. And I'm always using round numbers. It's been 15% unemployment for the most part my whole life. That hasn't changed. That needs to change. If that gets lower, gets cut in half, there's got to be some success happening somewhere. If it remains the same, the picture would tell you there's no success happening. Now, there may be some successes, but in the big picture, it wouldn't look like there is. At the UNSM, Danny Graham done a presentation, and at the end of his presentation, his comment was, the biggest thing that he sees right now is the #1 priority to deal with is the loss of our population. And I was sitting in the audience, and I got very agitated, because when he said that, and I spoke to him afterwards about his comments, and my agitation was based on that. He made the comment like a light bulb just come on. And I'm thinking, okay, you're just realizing there's an out-migration, depopulation problem that we have to look at? And he spoke about 2 of his children moving to Ontario, I believe, next year. We've been dealing with that for 30 years. There's nothing new about that. My number one thing back to him was, when people get up in this province and want to run as a leader to run the province, and they state publicly throughout the province they have a plan for the province, they need to get out of their offices with their departments and with the bureaucrats and come visit the province. And I asked John Wally, our former economic development officer, when was the last time that that happened with this municipality, when people, and I'm not talking about any particular government, you can look at the last 50 years, when was the last time that any of those individuals in those departments come down and said, here's our plan for the province, here's our plan for your end of the province, what's your plan, this is our plan, how do we work together to accomplish that? And the answer was never. That needs to change. If that doesn't change, we're going nowhere. So that's the biggest challenge for me. It's out-migration, absolutely, but we need to look at working together. And Minister Mumbercat has indicated that during the conference last week, he wants to change the way things are being done. That's one way that we can change. Let's get out and share the plan for the whole province with those various areas in the whole province. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
I have nothing to add. Everything's been covered.
Tammy?
So I think, just to pick up briefly on what Kendra said, I don't think we can measure success at all in 5 years if we still have hungry children. I don't think we can, I participated in a milk drive today in Dominion because some children have no milk ever. In 2017, I think that's disgraceful. So I don't think we can say we have any success when we have children in CBRM that get a treat by having powdered milk. I find that disgraceful. The out-migration is going to continue while we don't have health care to provide for people, while we don't have a fair and equitable minimum wage as compared to the rest of the province. Of course, people are going to Ontario and out west and whatever because their minimum wage is so much higher. So I think, you know what, first of all, child poverty. The other thing, if we can see a decrease in unemployment, of course, and I think to keep those people here, we need to reinvest in health care, we need to reinvest in minimum wage, we need to reinvest in the communities, and until we do that and realize that, we're going to continue to see out-migration.
Thank you. Gary?
You spoke earlier, Tom, about, I think your phrase was, changing the present trajectory. I think we'll know that the trajectory has been significantly changed when the numbers on particularly youth retention begin to improve and when the numbers on child poverty begin to decline.
Thank you. Roger?
And I'm going to have to take off. I have a call at 8:15, so these will be my last comments. But this has been very, very worthwhile. Just one of the general comments. You know, our communities. I'm born and raised in Glace Bay. You know, my son just bought my place back in Glace Bay. I'm in Myra now, but still very much a Glace Bay guy. But I'll tell you, being in this business 17 years, you got to fight for what is core to Glace Bay. I grew up, and you went downtown in Glace Bay on a Friday, Saturday night, and it was a happening spot. There was always something going on. But I don't live my life in Glace Bay with that sense of nostalgia. I know that the Miners Museum and that the Savoy and that the Bayplex, those are things that are important to that community. And I'll fight like hell. And the councillors around this table and Mayor Clark has been excellent and open with their conversations about it. People will come to me and say, so Roger, what's your plan about the Bayplex? I have no plan about the Bayplex. CBRM Council will have the plan for the Bayplex after they listen to the people of Glace Bay. But moving this place forward, moving this community forward has to come from the people through council, and I'll tell you, we'll be there. Mark and I will be there to support, and hopefully you've seen to date that, you know, we've been there to support you with the, you know, with your initiatives, and we'll continue to do that. As far as measurement, I like what Ray Ivney did with the report, because I think one thing that we really lack on a lot of cases, we see at the federal level, data is really not appropriate data. And now that we're back in government, having been in opposition and not having access to everything, but now working with the minister, we see that, and the data we get is really crappy data. It doesn't really tell you the whole picture. And the anecdotal stuff and the emotional stuff doesn't do us any good. It just clouds the issue. We have to be able to mine data. What I liked about Ray's report, you know, he changed the talk a little bit about, for example, tourism. He didn't talk about doubling the number of tourists. He wanted to double the revenues generated through tourism. In the fishery, not about, you know, catching twice as many fish, but where's the money lie? And the money lies in increasing the yield on that resource. So I think we have to, this is, far be it, this is not my area of expertise, but I think we do have to do a better job of identifying pertinent data, collecting that data, managing it, and then working towards solving the problems with that data.
Thank you.
And on that, I'm going to have to, but thank you very much for everybody. Thank you. Thanks, and Chris is going to stay, I think.
Alana.
Good to see you. Hi there. I think, and it's wonderful to come in to a room where people are starting to talk about the idea of not one size fits all. And I think that we will likely, like the true measurement of success, I think, is when we stop talking about an issue, right? We've been talking about similar issues, the same issues, since, you know, the last 20 years. And to be pretty frank with regard to out-migration, it is not a 5-year problem. It's not even a 30-year problem, with all due respect. It is a problem that's been happening since the 1860s, as far back as I can read. So people migrate to where opportunity exists. And right now we are not providing what is necessary for people to be able to come here and find opportunity to grow CBRM and Nova Scotia as a whole, as far as I can see. And I think we need to start with not being afraid to come forward and embrace bold, new ideas. And I think that we have been in a place that perhaps there's been a little bit of pushback with that. So I think true success comes with not just opportunity, but with when we stop talking about the issue, that's when the measure of success will come, or when I see that that will be successful. As far as retaining our youth, I think it's really important, and that is a measure of success, but we also have to be in a place where we actually can, I guess buy back is not the right term, but welcome home the youth that have gone away, because I'm one of them. I mean, I know I'm 47, but I'm still not that old. I am one of those kids that had to go away because there wasn't an opportunity here for me. And that's not such a bad thing. It's not such a bad thing to actually leave home, get a great education, get some experience under your belt, and actually be able to get those people to come back home with bold new ideas and with broad-minded intentions and opportunities. So, you know, we have the increasing of population or decreasing population, that's an issue with us. I don't think I've ever thought when I was first elected that I would sign so many condolence cards in a 5-month span. It was absolutely an eye-opening experience for me. We're not replacing those people in my constituency, and you guys are part of that constituency. I have 3 municipalities to deal with. So retain, call them back home. We need opportunities for them to come home too. But I also think there's opportunity there that we never really talk about, which is immigration is really important, but giving people opportunity to have like 1 or 2 more children, because I know a lot of them that would love to have an extra child, they cannot afford it. The families that are here cannot afford to have the children that they would really desire to have. So we need to be able to start thinking about that as well. Give families that are here opportunity to have more children. Okay.
Thank you. Arlene?
Thank you, Tom. I'm just really going to answer my marker for
Yes.
5 years from now. I understand that 5 years isn't a long time, but if I could see it, mine would be the increase in labor force participation to that rate to, at the very minimum, meet national average. And the reason I say that, there's 2 reasons for it. Number one, it would obviously reflect that we have a younger population coming in, because that's one of the reasons we are under the average rate. But number two, I know this may come as a surprise, but all Nova Scotians don't want to work. And I mean, we can laugh and we can giggle, but we all know somebody that says, well, you know what, I know someone that's hiring up the road. Yeah, well, I still have unemployment, and we'll wait till that runs out. Or, you know, in my district alone, we did a draw for the CBRM raffle for young people. You know, all you had to do was show up with a resume. And you had to be going to secondary education, be in grade 12 or in university. Not a big deal. But I'm going to say it was 8. I'm not sure if it was 7 or 8, but let's say we had 8 positions and room for 3 fill-ins in case somebody else got another job or what have you. We did not have enough people show up at that school to fill the 11. There was 9 people that showed up. So we had 8 jobs given in my particular district. And my district is 100 square kilometers. We're talking Millville, Burdore, North Sydney, Southside, Bullendry. I know there's kids. They weren't there. And that goes for adults too. I know jobs that, you know, you want, you know, every day, Erlene, if you hear anything, let me know. So when you call and you say, well, here it is, well, you know, I think I deserve a little more than that. So to see this labor force participation increase, it means that for once we may, as an entire province, get the mentality that if we want to improve as a whole, it takes every single one of us to stand up and get a job, whether we like it or we don't, or it's a starting step, it's a stepping stone. Go to work. Because when you go to work, you pay into taxes, you help us. So people need to change their mentality. So that, if we could see that increase in 5 years to the national rate or higher, I think we are on our way to success.
Okay. Thank you. Dan.
Thank you, Tom. I believe that population growth is a function or a factor of economic growth. So if your economy is strong, people will stay and people will come. And I can say that because of my experience with Member 2. We've experienced economic growth and we had population growth. So the 2 factors that I would say that need to be measured in CBRM in 5 years is, one, we need to measure the number of business startups. Now, I know in the dashboard we don't have that data yet, but it would be great to know what are the business startups in CBRM or Cape Breton. And the second one, of course, to me is how many firms are in the export trade. And that would be a measurement. If we can, 5 years from now, say we had X amount of startups, we had X amount of people that are involved in export trade, to me, that's turning the economy around. And people will stay if there's good jobs here. So that's what I would look for.
Okay, thank you. Cecil.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just kind of building on what's been said, it's really about the measurement of opportunity, whether that's labor force, participation, the other items. Because if we were sitting here tonight and we had those 30,000 people back and we're 130,000 municipality between ourselves and our 2 First Nation communities, and we had a third of child poverty, are we further ahead? So one of the things with counting population is not necessarily counting prosperity. And we use population stat, and I agree, Dan, with what you're saying, is what are those other measurements that actually say we're moving in the right direction and we're getting and we're achieving. So because it is true, we talk about, to emphasize a point, but really when you have new opportunities come, they're going to be in different forms. And one of the other areas, to go with what Councillor McMullen had talked about, Arlene, right here, the seafood industry, the stat that was there, Minister Caldwell, an area of concern for the department is difficulty in securing workers for the various processing plants by the hundreds across the province. And the same thing is shared in the agriculture processing sector as well. So there are challenges, but there is an opportunity. Like when we bring in, we talk about the temporary workers that come in. Well, are we going to be looking at those workers as future citizens and not just an economic stabilizer? Like people that do want to work in our society and be productive members and to have economic benefit and have families, and so you look at those growth areas. So I think it's great to talk about where we want to be with population, but I guess I would look at what are the opportunity measurements that say we're going in the right direction, because population is counted every 10 years, right? So it's a challenge.
Okay, so that on that point, sort of the opportunity measurements, I know, Don, we put a little bit of pressure on your collective, but if some of those priority measurements are a little bit different than the dashboard measurements, would your collective have the capacity to sort of help the region to sort of conduct those measurements, to report back? Okay. Okay, well, this is very good. So can we agree on some of the opportunity measurements? Dan mentioned a number of business startups. How many firms are in the export trade? Maybe a follow-up to you, Dan. Would you sort of see the goals of One Nova Scotia being equally applicable to our region, or would you set a different benchmark for our region, let's say in the next 5 years?
No, I think those 19 goals would be equally applicable to CBRM or Cape Breton.
Okay, okay, okay. So number of business startups, number of firms in the export trade. Are there other priority benchmarks that we should sort of put on the table that we can all agree on? That would be almost proxies for population and reduction of poverty. If we know we're doing well on these, then those other ones will follow. Tom?
I was going to make a comment, and I think George mentioned at the beginning. If Ray was here and if we had more time with Dan, if you took the Commission's report and you broke it down to 3 major buckets, it's economy, it's demographics, and the third leg of that stool is attitude. And we've been talking a lot tonight about the demographic challenges and measures and the economic challenges and measures. But I'm really, really inspired and mystified around the attitudinal bucket. And how do we measure movement in that? George, you mentioned your granddaughter I have a 21-year-old who can't wait to leave and a 29-year-old who can't wait to get back, to your point. He's in Alberta. He just wants to get back to Nova Scotia so badly. So in this role that I have as the president of NSCC, one of the greatest honors and the best parts of my job is talking to really inspirational, motivated young people. I did that a couple of weeks ago. I was meeting with Fred, and he and I and a carpentry instructor were talking. And the carpentry instructor, Vince, said, Don, you have to talk to so-and-so, a recent graduate. He's employed 6 other graduates, and they're building homes here in Cape Breton, and they can't keep up with it. So I gave him a call. And he spoke about how the Commission's report spoke to him. And one key message that Ray and Dan have said is that government was never the audience of that report. It was 940,000 Nova Scotians who were the audience of that report. And he had a fundamental attitudinal shift by saying, the responsibility lies with me. I have to make the change. So in 5 years' time, if we can come up with a way to measure attitudinal shift so that the people in Cape Breton look into a mirror and see a different island looking back at itself, then I think we're going to achieve success. It's how do you do that? There's no measure available right now to measure that attitudinal shift, but you sure as heck know it when you see it. And I saw it in that young man that he had a pivot in the way that he thought. And again, he's employing a half a dozen people. He's busier. And to your point, Mayor, he can't find people to work. He can't find people to work for him right now. He's paying a great wage. So in 5 years' time, I'd love to be able to design a measurement that we have an attitudinal shift change in the entire province, in Cape Breton. I live in the Annapolis Valley. I live in the big city of Hantsport. And we've had a major closure of a major plant there. All the young people are leaving, but there are some, there are about a dozen. Man, they're just changing the world. And you can just see it in them. How do we measure and affect that change?
Right. And so what are the qualitative words? We don't know maybe how to measure all of them. You're sort of getting at a kind of optimism, a kind of entrepreneurial spirit, kind of never say die, self-help.
Yeah, I think it's there's a whole, but there's a resiliency, there's a positivity. Senator Christmas talked about an entrepreneurial spirit, this sense of love, this sense of self. So there are a number of attributes that they would have. But any successful entrepreneur that I've had the pleasure of knowing, they are driven more by an internal force than they are by an external force. My wife is a tea sommelier. She makes her living in the beverage of tea. And if I said, that's a good business idea, I think I will try that, I would fail because it's not a natural part of who I am. But for her, it comes from within, that passion. That carpenter that I called on the phone, you could just feel that's who he is. That's what he loves to do. And that will drive success. So we can turn that switch on. I think we'd be very much more successful.
Have you seen examples of attitudinal shifts or sort of shifts in sort of, if I can call it this, like outlook in a community or a region that have inspired you, either in Nova Scotia or elsewhere?
Inverness was mentioned today. That is a case study of world proportions of how that has been an attitudinal shift. That would be a large one. And I've also seen it in very small situations. So yeah, there are a number of examples out there.
Okay. So can we all agree that we're going to just give some more thought to these sort of qualitative attitudinal benchmarks, sort of the self-help, the entrepreneurial spirit, the optimism, however we describe it. We're going to find ways to measure it, and we're going to find ways to cultivate it. Can we agree on that broad point? Yeah, Kendra.
Go off that actually. I was saying, I don't know, probably back to when I was in your classroom, that when coal and steel left and shut down, we went through what I consider not just an economic depression, but a social depression. And when you have a society who goes through this social depression, it's very hard to get out. And we see it when we see people who have become defeated and not going to work. We see that. It's a defeat. They are actually in a depression, whether you know it or not. That's what we see. When people see people who've just given up and this is how it is now and that's it, it's because they've given up because we all went through this depression together in a way. Coming out of it, we are, I believe, coming out of that depression. It is slow moving as any healing takes place. But that's what we're seeing, and you're seeing, and you can't really measure attitude, but you can see it. You can see it when you see new businesses starting up. There's a measure. A new business just started up, there's a measure of attitude change. People are going and supporting that new startup, there's an attitude change. People are taking care of their communities. That's an attitude change. I mean, we see it right now. We have illegal dumping. We have littering has run amok. But because people don't care. There's people who are out there who really don't care. However, when you start seeing the people taking care of the community and people cleaning it up and people looking after it as it should be always looked after and taking care of it as if it's as if it is precious to them. That is the measure of the change. When you don't see windows broken in your downtown businesses or homes just mysteriously going up in flames, those are your attitude changes. Those are the measurements, I think, because you can never measure. I don't think you can actually measure an attitude, but you can look at it through the other measurements.
Measured through an attitude.
Dan, in a nutshell, what should the region learn from the member to experience, and to what extent was attitudinal transformation a part of that larger and more complex experience?
Well, the big lesson was that things can change and communities can transform themselves. I mean, 20 years ago, Member 2 was really, really in a bad way. But despite that, and despite how difficult the circumstances are in Cape Breton, I believe that if one small Mi'kmaq community can change things and transform things and make a difference in the municipality, other communities can do the same. So I don't buy into this attitude that there's no hope. I believe that we have to look at things realistically and look at them what they are, but then at the same point, you have to believe that a solution is there and it's possible and change can happen. So despite my comments about the Cape Breton situation, I only say that because I know things can and will change. So I firmly believe that, Tom. That's our future.
Yeah, thank you. Elena?
I'm listening to the discussion here, and I really appreciate you bringing up attitudinal change. Years ago, I had worked for the Center for Entrepreneurship in Halifax, and one of the most difficult things in trying to discern whether or not a participant would be well, and it's not skill set that could be really measured, it's how do you measure soft skills, right? It's not the credentials that you usually see in a CV. It's all the other skill sets that are almost innate that a person has that will either make them successful or not successful. And part of that is attitude. We used to call it fire in the belly. And as much as it's important, I think, to measure business startups, the one thing I was always very interested in is how many of those get over the 5-year hump? It's all well and fine to talk that there's, this many businesses that have started up, but how many have actually been successful? Yeah, how many can be sustainable? That's the true measure of success, is it not? Not just startups, because it's easy enough to start up a business. There's all kinds of wonderful programs available for people to start things up, but we seem to have difficulty in being able to have people get over either it's a 4 to 7 years seems to be that critical point, and something that came up in my old work. The other thing too, I think that's really changed and that we don't really talk about, and again, it's this cyclical issue that we have with the family unit changing so dramatically in the last, especially 20 years. So with all this out-migration and smaller families, of course, having less children, we have people like myself who have elderly parents, and much like many people probably around this table, we have moved away. Our parents are here usually to take care of themselves. And there is a certain depression that occurs even in the child who's away, the people who are here, and also the strain on the system that we have with people having to use institutions so much more, where not that long ago, these parents would have continued to live at home. So a measure to me of success would be to see that what really, if I may say, Senator Christmas, one thing that I honor very much about your community and the Indigenous communities, the First Nations communities around the province, is that the family structure really still is very much intact in a way that does not exist in very many other communities. And I think that that adds a great deal of value in community health, in our health provincially, and it's also certainly takes a lot of strain away from a certain amount of money that goes into institutions. So that's a whole attitudinal shift right there that I think that is not spoken about enough.
Cecil, thank you.
Just quickly building on the comments, of course, when you market things like the Port of Sydney, having to have travel to many places to do many pitches and boardrooms to different areas, it's always interesting when you go in with that level of enthusiasm that is shared by this table, when you're called out and they say, what you're saying doesn't match up with the Google search, and because every one of them search before you've gone in, when you talk about the attitudinal shift, and then you try to explain to them, and this is about the issue. Cape Breton has a trust issue. We don't trust that things are real, and in fact, a lot of it has been, whether it was coal and steel, the whole process, for lack of better words, got bastardized between governments and unions and vice versa in terms of power plays and decisions and investments. That goes, and then it's the promise of, an iron ore pellet factory. It's going to be 800 people, and it doesn't come. And this sense of items being put out there and the rug being pulled. And it's that issue of trust, that there's a skepticism when you say, okay, we're marketing the port now, and this is really exciting, and we're out there excited about it. And other people are saying, yeah, you'll never see that. That's just smoke and mirrors. It's a great, and you have to work through. But when you actually talk to people, and I say, you'll find one thing about Cape Bretoners. They're hard workers. They're hard workers out west, and people to the core of the value system people have. And I said, there is skepticism, and there is a lack of trust, but you'll never have, the moment something is real, when it is real, you will never have bigger champions. So when you talk about an attitudinal shift, so we've talked about the port. It's my hope and prayer it's going to be real, and when it is real, you're going to see optimism start overtaking. And I talk to the young people you run into the airports, like, when's that port going to happen so I can come home with my family? Right? They're optimistic because they're out there working, and they aren't going to sit and not have a job. They're going to provide for the family, and they are, and they're younger. So the whole issue of attitudinal, but there's a recognition that is not the fault of people here, that there is an issue of lack of trust and skepticism about those in authority and those proposing and trying to do things. And that is not something you can easily erase, but it is something I believe when we do move, that attitudinal measurement is going to be phenomenal, because you'll have no better champions. Cape Bretoners rally behind any crisis, anyone in crisis, and when they have something good, they'll rally equally for the good. We just haven't been, it hasn't been real, and it hasn't been real in the point of view of tangibles here. And you talked about Inverness. They now have the problem complaining that growth is happening too fast. Like, what a great problem for Inverness. And if that's where the discussion goes, bring it on. So I think that whole issue, we have to build trust that these things are real. That attitudinal shift will move, and that measurement will manifest itself in startups and other people, you know, having their confidence in their future and families.
So reconciling those important points with a theme that was identified around the table with respect to the very high and unacceptably high rates of child poverty, which was the subject, among other things, of the United Way hosted summit that many of us were part of. To what extent were some of the attitudinal benchmarks part of the follow-up to that? Or are there, in addition, some follow-ups that should be on our radar with respect to benchmarking and the method to arrive at those benchmarks? So will our sort of identification of the attitudinal benchmarks help us to get at the child poverty crisis? Or are there some additional or sort of complementary benchmarks that we need?
What you're talking about. The attitude shift, yes, but I think the attitude shift also can only come when we actually start taking the poverty seriously. When we actually start investing and using government dollars to start addressing the issues. There are 4 pillars of poverty. We know what has to be done to get there, but we're not doing them, or we're doing them in a minute way that is not making any dents. You know, education, early education is one. When children are in early education, we know, but it's got to be done properly. We know that helps with child poverty. We also know that in order for two-parent, you know, we now need a 2-parent household income. We know that one parent has to stay home because they can't afford daycares. So you have that issue. Those are the things that we need government investing in. And it has to go inside. You can't just have an attitude change and then all this stuff happens. It has to go in together. So government's got to do their job. The private sector can do their job. And as people see that investment in themselves happening, there is, I guess for lack of a better word, there's some self-esteem issues people have, you know, and as a society, we kind of have the same self-esteem issues. Well, we need to see that we're being invested in order to feel like we're worth something. And I think, so it has to go hand in hand. An attitude will change when they see investments into them happening.
The powerful interrelation of all of these factors. Yes. I know we have gone, fortunately or unfortunately, well over time, but I just want to make sure we're comfortable with some of the next steps we've talked about. The benchmarkings on attitude, work on the charter. There seemed to be some broad consensus. Thinking through hubs and incubators, not just in Sydney, but sort of the regional core is obviously critical to the other cores in the region. Are there other next steps, other sort of homework that we're going to take from this session? We've had some wonderful commitments from the One Nova Scotia collective to help us measure the benchmarks we set and to burrow down to Cape Breton. Any other next steps?
Don's role on the first Nova Scotia. Do you report back to government on some kind of a basis? How often is it?
The ask was to report back to the province
Yes.
on an annual basis.
Okay.
However, we are trying to keep the website, the dashboard, as current as possible.
Okay.
So we're trying to take an annual report as a noun
Yes.
and change it into reporting as a verb to constantly keep it updated as much as possible.
Would you give them any recommendations along the way?
No,
None whatsoever?
that's not our role, no.
Eldon?
If I can, just in regards to the attitudinal change issue, I guess I'll take an opportunity coming on the end of the night to put a plug in for Don to help him maybe make an easier job of measuring that. There's been an attitude change just in discussions around the Marconi campus being moved to downtown Sydney. There's an attitude around that already, that people are feeling good about it. We don't even know what's going to happen, but the attitude is starting to change just with the discussion. Right. Hopefully the province will work with our municipality and the institution itself will work all together to make that happen. And I think if that can become a project and happens, I think you'll then have something to gauge attitudinal change in regards to what will happen and how our downtown may prosper. And I think that would be a good benchmark to be able to measure by, because that attitude is changing without even knowing if it's actually going to happen. So I'll just leave it at that note. Thank you.
CBU is sort of proud to be part of the various discussions and the various tables, but in a humble way, if there's sort of anything that I can do with colleagues, with people in this community to play a supportive role to all of you, let's keep those lines of communication open as well. I've been very inspired, even moved by this discussion. So the level of insight, of reflection, of collegiality, this gives me hope for our future as a region. I just have a quote from Moses Cody. In 1943, he wrote that the key to his movements, to his positive attitude, in spite of the adversity and the achievements in development, was a simple foundation. He said, and I quote, "It was discovered by facing the actual situation and planning in a way by which people could be mobilized to think, to study. And so we started discussion circles. It was in line with our whole cooperative idea. We would make people come together, discuss their problems, chart actions, and be responsible to each other." And so I'd like to thank you very much for being part of that discussion circle, that study club, that action-oriented study club this evening. Just on behalf of fellow citizens in the region, thank you for being committed to following through. And it's my fervent hope that the talents and the wisdom of all of us as people of the island will be part of the renewal that definitely lies ahead. So thank you kindly.
Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Really appreciate it. That was great.
I'd also like to thank Christina Lamy, who did a wonderful logistical work in bringing us together, just wonderful organizational skill. Trevor Turnbull, always sort of perfect with the technical support. Mark Bettens as well.